The day my mother died, it felt like someone had switched off the light in my soul. My mind shut down completely. I sat still in a corner of the house, unable to cry or speak, as if breathing itself had become meaningless. Wrapped in a white shroud, my mother was carried out of the house on the shoulders of strangers, but with her they carried away my heart, my strength, and my last reason to live. For days I barely moved. Visitors came and went, offering their condolences, their faces filled with rehearsed sorrow. Some offered comforting words, but others whispered things I didn't understand. One woman, in particular, leaned close and murmured something that shook me more than anything else. "Be careful around your father now," she said under her breath. "Your mother is no longer here, and you're all alone in this house with him." I blinked at her, stunned. What was she trying to say? What did she mean by that? But she didn't explain. She only placed her hand gently on my head and added, "It's my duty to warn you. Take care of yourself before something happens." Then she left, leaving a storm inside me. I couldn't sleep that night. Her words echoed in my mind, confusing and frightening. I kept telling myself she was wrong, that I knew my father better than anyone. But something deep inside me had begun to shift. 3 days passed. The house grew silent again. That's when it happened. My father walked into my room. I expected a shared moment of grief, a chance to finally break down in his arms. I wanted to cry, to talk about the loneliness that had taken over since my mother died. But before I could say anything, he spoke. And his words didn't offer comfort. They shattered something inside me. He looked at me with a seriousness I had never seen before and said something that made my ears ring. I couldn't process it at first. I just stared at him, stunned. My father was not supposed to say that, not to me. Suddenly, the woman's warning made perfect sense. I finally understood what she had meant. My heart raced, my skin crawled. I stared at the man I had trusted all my life, but all I saw was a stranger. He repeated his words, then stepped closer and took my hand. And in that moment, something inside me broke. The moment his fingers touched mine, I pulled away, as if his touch burned my skin. My body recoiled on instinct, and I shook my head firmly, unable to find the right words. His expression didn't change much. He didn't seem surprised. Instead, he offered a soft smile and spoke again, calmly, as though he was making a rational suggestion, not tearing apart the meaning of family. "You can't live like this," he said. "Neither can I. It's time to move into my room. It's the only way forward." I was frozen, unable to speak. I wanted to scream, to cry, to run. But my voice had abandoned me. My lips trembled as I whispered, "No, this isn't right. Every relationship has a boundary, a respect. I can't cross that." His face stayed composed, as if my refusal didn't shake him at all. He leaned closer and said in a near whisper, "You know, Roshni, we can't go on like this under the same roof. You're not a child anymore. You know what people will say? Why make this harder than it already is?" His tone was gentle, almost persuasive, but behind it I sensed a cold edge, a warning. He gave me time to think about it and said he didn't want to force anything. But then came the part that chilled my bones. "If you don't agree, what happens next will be far worse, and you won't be able to handle it." That night, after he left the room, I locked the door with shaking hands. I crawled onto the bed and wrapped myself in the blanket as though it could protect me. But nothing could shield me from the feeling that I was no longer safe in my own home. His words played in my head over and over. I tried to picture my mother's face, her voice, her warmth. What would she have done if she were alive? How would she have reacted to the idea that the man she trusted with her daughter had done this? Sleep refused to come. I spent the night tossing and turning, my heart torn between rage and helplessness. A part of me longed to vanish, to bury myself in the ground next to her and leave this nightmare behind. But morning arrived uninvited, dragging me back into reality. I had to leave my room for food, for water. But the thought of seeing him again made my chest tighten, and as soon as I stepped into the hallway, there he was. He was sitting in the lounge reading the newspaper like nothing had happened. As I passed by, his eyes lifted toward me, cold and unreadable. "Not planning to make breakfast today?" he asked casually. like a father trying to scold a lazy daughter. I didn't answer. I couldn't. I just walked quickly toward the kitchen, pretending I hadn't heard him, but he followed. I felt it before I saw it. His presence behind me as I tried to focus on boiling water, chopping onions, doing anything to keep my hands busy. But his closeness made it hard to breathe. I could hear him inhale behind me, feel his eyes studying me. And then he stepped even closer. In an instant, my body stiffened. My hands trembled as I held the spoon. The air became heavy with dread, and I could barely move. Just last week, I would have leaned on him for comfort, but now he was the danger I had to avoid. I glanced at him. He wasn't touching me, not yet, but the question in his eyes was clear. He wanted a response, not a verbal one, but something deeper. Consent. Surrender. I looked away. I finished cooking and hurriedly placed breakfast on the table. He followed me and sat down. Just as I turned to leave, he caught my wrist and gently pulled me into the chair beside him. I resisted, but he insisted, placing food in front of me like it was a normal morning. "You're taking too long," he said quietly, serving food onto my plate. "The more time you waste, the more difficult this becomes." "I don't want to keep waiting. Just close your eyes and say yes. It's not a journey across continents. It's one room to another. That's it." I wanted to scream. How could I make him understand that for me, that small step was larger than life? That room meant more than just a bed and walls. It meant betrayal. It meant replacing the one person who had protected me with the man she trusted the most. I shook my head slowly. I can't do this. You're the man I've called my father my whole life. This isn't right." He laughed, not out of joy, but something else. Bitterness, maybe. "So you want me to force you?" he asked. His tone was quiet but sharp. It sliced through my heart. I looked at him, horrified. He leaned in close, his breath warm against my face. "You know what will happen if you keep refusing. You'll lose everything, even the roof over your head." Then he got up and left. And I sat there, completely shattered. Even after he left the room, I couldn't move. My legs felt heavy, my throat burned with unshed tears, and my heart pounded so loudly I could barely hear anything else. The food on the plate went cold, untouched. I wasn't hungry. I wasn't even sure I was alive anymore in the way I used to be. Something inside me had cracked. By evening, my body had started giving up. My head ached and my temperature soared. I was burning with fever, my skin cold and clammy, my hands trembled, and I wrapped myself tightly in the blanket, hoping it would all pass, this illness, this fear, this life. I lay curled up on the bed, drenched in sweat, unable to call for help. I didn't want him to come. I didn't want anyone near me. I just wanted to vanish. But he came anyway. It was late at night when he opened the door. I heard his footsteps as he entered. He called my name, saw me lying in bed, and rushed over. He placed his hand on my forehead and sighed. "You're burning up." Then he did something that made me flinch. He removed the blanket and pulled me into his arms. I wanted to scream, to fight, to push him away, but I had no strength left. My body collapsed into his, too weak to resist. He held me close, too close. His chest was warm against my feverish skin. He pressed his lips to my forehead and whispered, "Don't make this harder than it already is. Stop fighting. You need love. You need care. Let me take care of you. Let me give you what you deserve." His words blurred into the heat of my sickness. My eyes fluttered shut, not from trust, but exhaustion. Tears slipped from the corners of my eyes. I wasn't asleep, but I let him believe I was. Maybe if I stayed still long enough, he'd go. But he didn't. That night, something inside me broke for good. I gave in, not from choice, but from helplessness. And the next morning, when sunlight poured through the window, I knew I would never be the same. I couldn't tell what part of me had died first, the daughter, the child, or the woman who once believed in safety. All I knew was that my story had taken a turn I'd never imagined, and now I had no way to undo it. My name is Roshni. I was only 17 when I stood silently in front of a few gathered neighbors, dressed not as a grieving daughter, but as a bride. Not to a stranger, but to the man I had always called my father. He had arranged everything. He had convinced the few people we knew that I wasn't really his daughter, that I was adopted, that there was no blood between us, and that now, with no family left and no one to protect me, marriage was the only respectable option, a man taking care of a woman who had no one. I stood beside him as the ceremony began. I didn't cry, I didn't blink, I just stared at the floor while vows were spoken and signatures were written. My hands trembled as he slipped a ring on my finger. A ring that was meant to bind me, not protect me. Some guests nodded in approval, others whispered behind their hands, but nobody stopped it. That night, I lay in a bed that used to be hers, the woman who had raised me, the woman who had called him her husband. Now it was my room, my marriage, my burden. He entered slowly with the nervous energy of a man about to claim something forbidden, but now suddenly lawful. I closed my eyes, praying for the strength to endure what was to come. When he touched me, I didn't flinch. I had already broken. When he whispered, "You're safe now," I didn't believe him. In the weeks that followed, I did everything a wife was expected to do. I cooked, I cleaned, I nodded when spoken to, and I kept my pain locked behind a soft smile and tired eyes. Because that was the only way I knew how to survive. By the end of the year, I was a mother, 17 years old and holding a child in my arms, his child. The same man who had once lifted me into the air and kissed my cheeks like a daughter. That line had vanished, and now I was a mother of a son whose father was the man who had raised me. And it didn't stop there. Year after year, I gave birth again and again. By the time I was 21, I was carrying my fourth child, but the weight I carried wasn't just in my belly. It was on my heart, my soul, my very breath, because I still couldn't answer one question. Was I a wife, a daughter, or a prisoner? The hospital room was filled with the scent of antiseptic, the buzz of fluorescent lights, and the quiet tension that always surrounds a difficult birth. I was on the verge of delivering my fourth child. My body was exhausted, my spirit fractured. I wasn't just afraid of the pain, I was afraid of what this child would symbolize. Another innocent soul born from a relationship I had never truly accepted. Doctors hovered around me, urging me to stay calm. My blood pressure was dangerously high, my pulse erratic. "You need to relax," the nurse kept repeating. But how could I? Every time I closed my eyes, I saw flashes of the past, my childhood, the face of the woman I had always believed was my real mother, the comfort of her embrace, the way she'd protect me from the world, then her death, her secret, the truth that she was never my biological mother, that I was adopted, that even the love I thought was mine had been borrowed. And now, I was here, in a delivery bed, about to give birth to the fourth child of the man I used to call father. My mind screamed for escape. I wanted to disappear, to erase the last few years of my life, the years that had turned me from a daughter into something else, a caretaker, a possession. A woman whose choices had been smothered under layers of social fear and emotional manipulation. As the pain peaked and I cried out, the doctor shouted, "Push!" And I did, because there was no other option. Minutes later, a soft cry filled the air. My son was born. He was tiny, perfect, and blameless. Just like the others, just like me once. He was wrapped in a blue blanket and placed beside me. I couldn't bring myself to look at him. My eyes were heavy, not just with exhaustion, but with grief. Grief for the life I could have had, for the girl I used to be, for the future I no longer dared to dream of. A short while later, he entered the room. He picked up the baby and whispered the call to prayer into his ear, as he had with each child before. Then he leaned over and kissed my forehead. "Another blessing," he said softly. "Maybe things will finally get easier." But I turned my face away. I couldn't meet his eyes, because every time I saw him, I was reminded of the night I lost everything, including myself. 2 days later, I was discharged from the hospital. I held my newborn gently in my arms as I stepped into the same home that had witnessed both my childhood and my undoing. The walls were the same, the rooms unchanged, but everything inside me had shifted. When we reached the living room, he helped me settle in, placing the baby's cradle beside the couch. His face looked tired, older than before. For the first time, I noticed the slump in his shoulders, the gray threading through his hair. Perhaps life had caught up with him too. That evening, he sat across from me in silence for a long time before finally speaking. "I've started a new business," he said. Well, maybe it's a sign that things are changing for the better." I didn't respond then. After a deep breath, he added, "If you don't want to stay with me anymore, I'll understand. I'll move out. I'll still provide for you and the children. You'll never be without support." I looked up, startled. He wasn't angry. He looked defeated. I realized then that perhaps he had seen what I had become, hollowed out, resentful, withdrawn. Maybe the doctors had spoken to him about my mental state. Or maybe, in his own way, he had finally noticed the tears I had never cried in front of him. He stood, walked into the bedroom, and began packing a small bag. "I'll stay nearby," he said, "but I won't force anything anymore. You've given me enough, more than I ever deserved." As he turned to leave, I stared at the doorway in silence. And then, something in me shifted. I reached out and grabbed his arm. He stopped and looked down at me. "I don't want to be alone," I whispered. My voice was barely audible, but it carried years of buried pain. He knelt in front of me, his eyes glistening. "Then let me stay," he said gently. "But stop punishing yourself. Stop punishing me. I didn't do this to hurt you. I did what I thought would protect you." Tears welled in my eyes. I didn't respond. I couldn't. But I didn't let go of his hand either. In that fragile moment, something broke. Not the pain, it still lingered, but the wall around my heart began to crack. Maybe, just maybe, healing was possible. The days that followed weren't perfect, but they were different. For the first time in years, there was space to breathe. He stayed, just as I had asked, but he gave me distance, physical and emotional. He no longer pressed me for affection, nor demanded the intimacy that once suffocated me. It was as if he, too, had made peace with something inside himself. I began to watch him in silence. The way he fed the children, helped them with schoolwork, carried our youngest in the crook of his arm. He wasn't a bad man. At least not in the way people expected bad men to be. He had never raised his voice at me, never struck me, never let us go hungry. But he had taken something from me I could never reclaim, my innocence, my right to choose, my right to grow into a woman before being turned into a wife. And yet, he had also stayed. Protected, provided, sacrificed. This contradiction haunted me. Each night I sat by the window, listening to the wind and wondering what life could have been if someone, anyone, had made a different decision. If my mother hadn't died, if she had told the truth sooner, if the world had given us even a sliver of mercy. One evening, as the children slept and I folded their clothes, he stood in the doorway. His voice was quiet. "I've made peace with whatever decision you make. If one day you choose to leave, I won't stop you." I didn't look up. My hands trembled slightly over a small shirt. "And if I don't leave? Then stop hating me," he said, his tone heavier than I'd ever heard. "Because I can live without your touch, but I can't live being the villain in your eyes." That night, I lay in bed thinking long and hard. About what he had done, about what I had accepted, about how life had dragged both of us into a story neither of us asked for. Perhaps love had never been part of it, but survival was, and maybe forgiveness too. So the next morning, when he placed a cup of tea beside me, I looked him in the eye and said, "Let's try." He didn't smile. He didn't celebrate. He just nodded as if he'd been waiting for years. It wasn't a new beginning. It wasn't even peace. But it was the first time I had made a decision for myself. Life didn't transform overnight, but something within me had shifted. I no longer looked at him with fear or confusion. I had stopped resisting every conversation, every gesture, every shared silence. Not because I had fallen in love, no, but because I was exhausted. Tired of dragging the past behind me like a corpse I was too afraid to bury. We began to function like any ordinary couple raising children. He still went to work. I managed the house, the school routines, the noise, the mess, the late-night feedings. The children saw nothing strange in us. They only knew that their father cared and their mother cooked, kissed their foreheads, and kept the home warm. Sometimes I envied their innocence, but more than envy, I feared the day they would grow up and start asking questions. Who would I be in their eyes? A mother who survived or a woman who surrendered? One evening, after putting the kids to bed, I found him sitting alone going through old bills. His face looked worn, far older than his years. When he noticed me, he closed the file and quietly said, "You don't have to stay because of the children." I sat across from him, not out of duty, but because I wanted to understand. "I'm not staying just because of them," I said carefully. "I'm staying because I don't know where else I belong anymore." He didn't speak for a long time. Then he reached into a drawer and pulled out a small journal. "Your mother used to write in this," he said, placing it on the table. "Before she died, she gave it to me. Told me to give it to you when the time was right. I guess I didn't know when that would be. Maybe now." That night, I read every page. And with every line, every scribbled thought, I felt her closer to me than she had ever been, even in life. Her words were full of guilt, of love, of regret. She knew what her silence had cost me. But she had trusted him too, once. And maybe, in her own broken way, she had hoped that love could cover the scars time would leave. By the time the sun rose, I had made another decision. Not about him, but about myself. I would raise my children with strength and honesty. I would teach them boundaries, truth, and choice. I couldn't undo the past, but I could reshape the future. Time passed, and though the questions never left my heart, the pain slowly softened into something else, something quieter. It was no longer sharp or suffocating, but dull and constant, like a scar that no longer bled but still ached in the cold. I had begun to live, not just survive. My husband, once the man I had called father, became someone else in my eyes. Not a lover, not entirely a protector, but a man shaped by loneliness, by longing, by a love that perhaps blurred too many lines. I still struggled to understand him, but I no longer resented him with the same fire. He tried, in his own way, gave me space, respected my silence, helped with the children. He even began to read, to pray, to learn how to be better, not just for me, but for himself. One afternoon, after our youngest had drifted off to sleep in my lap, he came and sat beside me. He didn't speak for a while, just watched the child's chest rise and fall. Then he whispered, "You've become everything I never deserved." I didn't respond. I didn't need to. We both understood that words could never fix the past, but they could soften its weight. Months later, I began writing. It started as a journal, like the one my mother had kept, but it grew into something more, a story. My story. Not to shame anyone, not to cry for pity, but to finally hear my own voice after years of being drowned out by others' decisions. And now, if you're reading this, it means I found the courage to share it. Some will judge me. Others might call it sin, weakness, or madness. But I know what it was: survival. I had nowhere else to go. No real name, no real family. I was the child of no one, the wife of someone I once called father, the mother of children born from a union I never asked for, but chose to accept. Life is rarely black or white. Sometimes it's made of grays too painful to name, but in the end I chose to live, not in shame, but in honesty. If I had walked away, I may have survived, but staying taught me to forgive, to rebuild, to rise, and maybe, just maybe, one day my children will read this and understand. Not everything I did was right, but every step I took was for love, even if I was never taught what love truly meant.